Hello, I'm Hugh. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My channel where I talk about photojournalism and journalism in general and the media and its challenges. Of course, this channel, as you know, is mainly for my students who are doing e-learning at the moment. But it's also a channel that's designed for generally people who are interested in the media, people who want to know a bit about media theory, people who want to know a bit about the theory underpinning photojournalism, people who want an introduction to that. So it's open to everyone, and everyone is welcome to comment and like and share, as they say, apparently. I'm new to this. I'm doing this all in one take, so if it is, or it might end up being 2 takes, we'll see how it goes. So yeah, or it'll be 1 take in 2 parts basically. So today I'm talking about photography, privilege and representation. Let's get right into it. Firstly, what is privilege? Privilege refers to power being unevenly distributed in society. Privilege refers to unearned advantage because of that social power, be it political, be it economic. It's often used to refer to the sometimes taken for granted kind of things that certain groups with privilege enjoy, and that certain groups with privilege, without privilege, do not enjoy. For example, if you go to a multi-story building, you'll pretty much take for granted that there'll be stairs. You know, a multi-story building has stairs. If you happen to be in a position of underprivilege, in this case being a disabled person, a building may or may not have ramps. Or it may only have ramps installed in recent years for your wheelchair because the government forced them to. Whereas if you're visiting a historic building, you might still have problems. It varies from country to country. In my country, you frequently find only the newer buildings do have full ramps and all the facilities that a wheelchair user would need. So that's an example of how privilege favors certain groups with power. The non-disabled get to decide that we'll have a way to get from one floor to another of a building that suits us. And it often takes a cognitive shift on behalf of the privileged. You've been walking your entire life, you may have thought nothing of the fact that there are steps. Some of us might even be walking up ramps in malls because we think they're cooler than steps, not realizing that we're even crowding out disabled people who actually need to use those ramps. So it's very easy, if you do have a certain level of privilege, to be the taken for granted person and to take for granted the advantages you have. Whereas you have to take a step back and think about, okay, what about people who don't have this? Are they being given chances? So there are many layers of privilege in society. Obviously, if you weren't hiding behind a rock the last week or so, you have heard talk about, racial privilege and those kind of challenges being faced in the US, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to notice that these are challenges faced in our country too and all around the world. You'd be hard-pressed living in Namibia in recent years to not notice gender privileges. Hopefully, if you're a guy, you're aware that the very idea that you can, walk, say, from a bar to your car late at night, walk past a construction site and not be harassed, not fear for your life at a party, mostly, not fear when you go to a party that maybe your drink will be spiked and maybe you'll wake up somewhere you don't know in the morning, having been raped. If you're a woman, these are privileges, of course, that you don't have. And it's surprising, because they're in a privileged position and because they're seen by society as, so to speak, the default. It's very easy for men, I think, not to realize they have some of these privileges. There are several layers of privilege in society, several different modes of oppression that lead to some people being privileged and some people being disadvantaged. For my students, I sent them to look at a cartoon called Robot Hugs on the internet that talks about some of these issues and gives herself as an example, the cartoonist. For me, of course, as a white Namibian, I enjoy a lot of advantages. As an English-speaking Namibian, I get to teach and learn and go as far as a whole PhD learning in my first language, which is English, which is a big privilege, something many of us, I think, might not think about too much. But imagine if you could write your PhD thesis in Oshikwanyama, or in Silozi or Damara or Setswana. That would be revolutionary. But right now it's unfortunately a level of privilege that English-speaking people have in Namibia. And there are so many, just the way, police officers look at you at checkpoints, even a black police force in a supposedly liberated country, you get these kind of privileges. On the other hand, I also occupy several positions of underprivilege, as a bisexual person, as a person with mental health challenges. Even talking about some of these things is a bit taboo, whereas talking about being white is almost regarded as normal. So there are positions of privilege and underprivilege. Obviously, as someone who only has Namibian citizenship, there's certain marginalization compared to someone who has citizenship of a global north country, the countries that have all the power. So privilege does, there are different kinds of privilege, different kinds of oppression, they intersect with each other. Privilege is often invisible to the privileged, whereas to the underprivileged it's something that affects their everyday lives, it can't be ignored. To come back to the issue of disabled people, whenever a privileged person thinks he's only going to build a building with steps, it affects their lives completely. Imagine working in a building where you work on the 5th floor and you have to be carried up the stairs every morning. Another thing, privilege is a fact. Talking about privilege is talking about facts. It's talking about social inequalities. It's not an insult. So if I say you have privilege, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad person. It means that you're benefiting from certain inequalities in society, and yes, you have certain obligations. How to manage privilege? The one thing is sometimes you have to shut up. Winston Churchill famously said that it takes courage to stand up and speak, but it also takes courage to sit down and listen. So as someone with privilege, as someone who's never experienced the humiliation, for example, of having to be carried up a flight of stairs to your workplace every morning because you use a wheelchair. If you haven't had that, you better listen to disabled people and what they're saying about that kind of life, what it's like. Before you offer your own solutions, you better listen to what solutions they have to that problem. Your privilege has in fact shielded you from a lot of life's rougher edges. So listen to other people when they want to speak. Don't force them to speak about it, but if they want to speak about it, listen to them and try and understand what they're saying. Read as far as you can. You know, there's so much writing on privilege and underprivilege and social injustice from all sorts of points of view. So read as much as you can. Google is always your friend. Always try and use your privilege for good. Don't speak above underprivileged people, but always stand up with them when they're fighting for greater justice. I'm sure some of you have seen in some of these protests in the US, white Americans who were also committed to the cause actually formed like human shields to protect the black protesters from police violence and from army violence where necessary. It's very important that we do that. It's very important we try and use our privilege. Of course, you might want to disavow your privilege when you can. Like every so often in bank queues, especially in northern Namibia, I find people look at my skin color and assume I'm a foreign tourist or something and usher me through to the front of the bank queue. And of course, in those instances where it's obvious and you can do something, you must say, no, it's okay. I'll stay here and I'll wait with my people. That's what I've always said. But in some cases, there's very little you can do. There's little I can do about Namibia's language policy and higher education policy that advantages me as an English speaker. But I can use my abilities with English, which is considered an international language and so on and so forth and widely understood. I can use those, as unjust as it is, to speak out about social injustice and the need for social change, and it's very important that I do that. Okay, you may ask, what does this have to do with the media? And what does it have to do with photography? Well, photography is a skilled activity. At its highest level, it still is, maybe less so than it, or maybe these skills are easier to acquire than they used to be, but the fact is you need certain skills which require time to obtain, which require money as well. You know, the money to pay school fees, the money to buy camera equipment, the money to get data if you want to post your pictures on the internet. You know, it requires, if you're going to host a photography exhibition, you need a certain amount of money to do that. So it's a hard profession to get into. If you look at who a lot of the photographers are in society and who the pictures are taken of, there are marked inequalities. There are still many male and rather few female photographers, professional photographers in Namibia. Although this is changing, there is still a disproportionate number of white people, especially at the higher levels. And also if you think of some of the ethnic inequalities, some of the most photographed people in Namibia are the San people, the so-called Bushmen. They're in every kind of guidebook and tourist book and photo documentary and photo exhibition and everything like that. It's very rare to find a San professional photographer. There are some I know of or some who've at least had exhibitions and things in Botswana and South Africa. I don't know of one in Namibia. The same can largely be said for other people seen as traditional or quote-unquote exotic. I hate that word, but that's sometimes used even in tourist guidebooks and things. You know, people like the Himba who still live a traditional lifestyle. It's quite rare to have pictures taken of San people and Himba people by San and Himba people themselves. There was one exhibition I attended maybe 2 or 3 years ago, which did have the himbas shooting themselves with cameras, that is. But I do have issues about that because it was still a white person acting as curator of those images. So there's still an element of privilege there. So I think we as photographers need to be very careful. Whenever we're going into communities, it might be more often than not we have certain privileges that they don't have. Even if you have certain levels of underprivilege, even if you're black, the fact that you attended journalism school at university gives you certain class privileges over many of the people you take pictures of. If you're a black man taking pictures of women who are victims of gender-based violence, then definitely as a man you have certain privileges there, and you need to make an effort above all to, how can I say it, to listen to the women you're taking pictures of, to hear their stories, to question what their stories mean, to question whether you're interpreting the stories right. For example, a lot of men seem to think that the slogan "men are trash" is somehow an insult at them and a threat aimed at them, and it absolutely isn't. It's about sociological realities. It's about the way the majority of men behave. It's about the way that society constructs manhood, linking manhood with violence and being tough, and never with sort of human qualities like being kind and being thoughtful. That's what men are trash means. But if you're just in your privilege and you're taking pictures of a demonstration where people are waving banners saying men are trash, it's going to affect the way you take pictures. So it's very important to listen, to step back as a person with privilege, and it's very important to see your photography and your journalism as something that will be used to change situations, will be used to improve situations where you have privilege and other people, through no fault of their own, do not. Thank you very much. I'm going to post another video where we look at some images, actually some best practices, although I often show my students the worst practices, but that's going to be the next video. For now, thank you very much. Like and share, as they say.